The mahogany conference table reflected Marcus Chen's clenched fist as he slammed it down, sending ripples through untouched cups of artisanal coffee. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Pinnacle Financial's 42nd floor, Seattle's skyline stretched endlessly, but Marcus saw only the red numbers bleeding across his laptop screen. 3 months. That's all the runway his tech startup had left before complete financial collapse. "Sir, your lunch reservation at Meridian Bistro is confirmed for 1 o'clock," his assistant Jenny whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm brewing in his expression. She had learned to read the warning signs, the way his jaw tightened, how his expensive Italian leather shoes tapped an increasingly frantic rhythm against the polished concrete floor, the manner in which his perfectly styled black hair began to show finger tracks from his anxious running of hands through it. Marcus Chen had built his reputation on being untouchable. At 34, he'd sold 2 companies for 8 figures and been featured on Forbes twice. But his current venture, Next-Gen Analytics, was dying. Their primary investor had pulled out that morning, taking $12 million with them. The elevator descended through floors of Seattle's financial district, each ding marking another layer of Marcus's carefully constructed world threatening to crumble. He straightened his charcoal Tom Ford suit, adjusted his platinum Rolex, and practiced the smile that had charmed countless boardrooms. Today's lunch wasn't just about food, it was about survival. He was meeting Sarah Mitchell, a potential client whose manufacturing company could provide the steady revenue stream Next-Gen desperately needed to stay afloat while searching for new investors. Meridian Bistro's brick facade spoke to Seattle's historic charm while maintaining modern elegance. The maitre d' recognized Marcus immediately, leading him to his usual corner table. But Sarah Mitchell was nowhere to be seen. Marcus checked his Patek Philippe watch, a gift to himself after his second successful exit. 1:15. In his world, punctuality wasn't just courtesy, it was respect. Each minute that ticked by felt like another small cut to his already wounded pride. He ordered a mineral water with lime, his fingers drumming against the white linen cloth as he rehearsed his pitch. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of Seattle's business elite, the gentle clinking of silverware against fine china, creating a soundtrack of success that now felt mocking. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah's assistant. "Miss Mitchell sends her regrets. An emergency board meeting was called. I will need to reschedule." The words hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about losing a potential client. It was about time he didn't have, opportunities evaporating, and the slow-motion catastrophe of watching everything he'd built slip through his fingers. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, a familiar anger that had served him well in negotiations, but often left collateral damage in personal relationships. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood floors with a sound that turned several heads. The mineral water remained untouched, its bubbles rising toward the surface like his own mounting frustration. As he reached for his briefcase, his elbow caught the water glass, sending it tumbling toward the edge of the table. "Oh!" The exclamation came from his left, where a young woman had appeared as if from nowhere, catching the glass mid-fall with reflexes that spoke of long practice handling disasters. She was perhaps 26, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing the restaurant's signature black uniform. Her name tag read Elena. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me clean this up immediately," she said, already reaching for a cloth from her apron. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but there was something in her eyes, a quick intelligence that seemed to catalog everything about the situation in an instant. Marcus barely registered her intervention. His mind was spiraling through calculations, the overhead costs mounting daily, the salaries he'd have to cut, the humiliation of explaining to his team that their revolutionary technology might never see the market because he couldn't secure funding. The pristine restaurant around him felt suddenly oppressive, filled with people who hadn't just watched their dreams get canceled via text message. "This is exactly what I needed today," he muttered, his voice carrying more venom than the situation warranted. The rational part of his mind knew this wasn't the young woman's fault, but rationality had been crushed under the weight of mounting pressure and public expectations. Elena continued cleaning, her movements unhurried despite his obvious agitation. She said, "Sometimes the worst days have a way of surprising us," she quietly said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent, European, perhaps Mediterranean. "My grandmother used to say that storms clear the air for better weather." Something about her calm composure in the face of his visible distress ignited the ember of his frustration into a flame. Here he was, facing the potential destruction of everything he'd worked for, and this waitress was offering him fortune cookie wisdom. The disconnect between her simple world of spilled water and his complex universe of million-dollar decisions felt like mockery.
"Look," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that his employees had learned to fear. "I don't need philosophical advice from someone whose biggest daily challenge is remembering who ordered the salmon. Some of us have real problems." The words left his mouth before he could stop them, hanging in the air like poison. Several nearby diners turned to look, their conversations pausing as they sensed the tension. Elena's hand stilled on the table, the cloth bunched in her fingers. For just a moment, her composed mask slipped, revealing something that looked like recognition, not of rudeness, but of something deeper and more personal. She straightened slowly, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that held none of the subservience he expected. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice carrying a new quality. Not defiance, exactly, but a quiet strength that made him suddenly uncomfortable. Some people do have much bigger problems than remembering food orders. Sometimes those problems make them forget that everyone around them is fighting battles they can't see. Marcus felt a flicker of something, shame perhaps, or the recognition that he just attacked someone who had been trying to help him. But the feeling was quickly buried under layers of stress and wounded pride. He was Marcus Chen. He didn't apologize to service staff for speaking truths, however harshly delivered. "Just bring me the check," he said, already reaching for his wallet. He needed to get out of here, needed to regroup and figure out how to salvage his company from the wreckage of this day. The last thing he needed was a lecture on empathy from someone who probably made more in tips on a good night than he was about to lose in the next quarter. Elena nodded once, professionally, and moved toward the service station. As she walked away, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that made him pause. The way she carried herself, with a confidence that seemed at odds with her humble uniform. There was something about her posture, the way other staff members seemed to defer to her despite her apparent junior status, that registered in the part of his mind trained to read people and power dynamics. But the observation was fleeting, pushed aside by the urgent demands of crisis management. He had calls to make, investors to contact, and a company to save. Whatever momentary curiosity this unusual waitress had sparked was irrelevant compared to the very real possibility that next-gen analytics might not survive the month. As he left the restaurant, stepping out into Seattle's perpetual mist, Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts. Somewhere in that list was a solution, a white knight investor who could see the potential in his technology and provide the funding to keep his dream alive. He just had to find them before time ran out. Behind him, through the restaurant's large windows, Elena watched him disappear into the crowd of pedestrians. She stood perfectly still for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached into her apron and pulled out a small device, not a phone, but something that looked remarkably like the latest model of tablet, expensive and clearly out of place in a server's uniform. Her fingers moved across its surface with practiced ease, pulling up what appeared to be a complex financial dashboard filled with graphs, numbers, and company profiles. At the top of the screen, highlighted in bold letters, was a familiar name: Next-Gen Analytics. The afternoon sun broke through Seattle's clouds for just a moment, casting long shadows across the restaurant floor. Elena's face, illuminated by the natural light, showed not the expression of a humiliated service worker, but something far more complex. The look of someone who had just learned something very important about the character of a person she was about to make a very significant decision about. The water glass she had saved from falling sat on the table where Marcus had left it, its surface now still and clear, like the calm before a much larger storm. Elena Vasquez had been awake since 4:30, but not for her Meridian bistro shift. In her Queen Anne apartment, she sat surrounded by monitors displaying global financial data. By day, she was Elena the waitress. By night, she was managing partner of Meridian Capital, one of the Pacific Northwest's most successful venture capital firms. The irony of the restaurant sharing her firm's name wasn't lost on her. She had chosen to work at Meridian Bistro precisely for the anonymity it provided in a city where her face graced the covers of business magazines and her investment decisions could make or break entire industries. This double life hadn't been born from some romantic notion of understanding the working class. 3 years ago, her world had imploded when her previous investment firm, Pinnacle Ventures, had been rocked by a scandal involving her business partner and former fiancé, David Mortensen. While she had been cleared of any wrongdoing, the court of public opinion had been less forgiving. Overnight, she had gone from being Seattle's most celebrated young investor to a pariah whose name was whispered in boardrooms with suspicion and doubt. The waiting job had started as temporary cover while she rebuilt her reputation and launched Meridian Capital. She needed time away from the spotlight, a chance to observe the business world from a different angle. What she hadn't expected was how much she would learn about human nature from this unique vantage point. Powerful executives, stripped of their usual deference and surrounded by the comfortable anonymity that came with being served by invisible staff, revealed their true characters in ways that no boardroom ever could.
Now, as she prepared for another double shift, morning meetings as Elena Vasquez, afternoon service as Elena the waitress, she reviewed the file that had consumed her attention for the past 6 weeks. Marcus Chen and next-gen analytics represented exactly the kind of revolutionary technology that Meridian Capital sought to support. Their AI-driven consumer behavior prediction models could transform entire industries, and early beta tests showed results that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Elena had been quietly watching the company for months, conducting the kind of deep due diligence that had made her reputation before the scandal. She had interviewed their clients, analyzed their technology, investigated their competition, and studied their financials with microscopic attention to detail. Everything about next-gen analytics impressed her, except for the persistent rumors about Marcus Chen's leadership style. Former employees described a brilliant but volatile CEO who treated subordinates as expendable resources. Client testimonials praised his vision while carefully avoiding any mention of personal interactions. Industry colleagues respected his achievements while maintaining careful distance from the man himself. Elena had dismissed these concerns as jealousy or the inevitable cost of demanding excellence. After all, she reasoned, transformational leaders often had to make unpopular decisions. That morning's investor meeting had been scheduled for weeks. Elena, carefully disguised behind her professional wardrobe and the confident bearing of someone who controlled hundreds of millions in investment capital, was supposed to meet Marcus at his office to discuss a potential $40 million investment that could save his company and launch next-gen analytics into the stratosphere of tech success. But David Mortensen had other plans. Elena's former partner had somehow learned about the potential investment and had spent the morning making calls to mutual contacts, spreading rumors that Meridian Capital was being investigated by federal regulators for suspicious trading practices. The claims were completely false, but in the interconnected world of high-stakes investing, perception often mattered more than reality. By 10 a.m., 3 other potential deals had been postponed pending clarification of recent concerns. Elena had been forced to cancel the meeting with Marcus and spend her day in damage control mode,
calling lawyers, preparing statements, and working to contain David's latest attempt to sabotage her rebuilt career. The fact that she still had to report to her waitressing shift added another layer of complexity to an already impossible day. As she tied her hair back and adjusted her name tag, Elena reminded herself that this was temporary. The restaurant job provided more than just cover. It offered perspective that her wealthy peers lacked. She had seen how different people treated those they perceived as beneath them, and that insight had informed every investment decision she made. Companies led by executives who showed genuine respect for all levels of employees consistently outperformed those run by leaders who viewed staff as interchangeable parts. The lunch shift at Meridian Bistro typically attracted Seattle's business elite, making it the perfect laboratory for studying the correlation between personal character and professional success. Elena had developed an almost scientific approach to these observations, keeping detailed mental notes about how different executives treated service staff and comparing those observations to their company's long-term performance metrics, which made her encounter with Chen particularly devastating. Elena replayed the conversation as she prepared silverware and checked table settings. She had been genuinely trying to help. The man had looked genuinely distressed, and her natural empathy had overwritten her professional objectivity. Instead of maintaining the invisible servant role that kept her identity safe, she had offered comfort to someone clearly in pain. His response had been like a physical slap. Not because of the insult itself. Elena had heard far worse during her 3 years in service, but because it revealed a fundamental character flaw that no amount of due diligence had uncovered. Chen wasn't just demanding or high-strung under pressure. He was someone who genuinely believed that his problems were more important than other people's dignity. The comment about remembering who ordered the salmon was particularly cutting because it revealed his complete dismissal of the skills, intelligence, and humanity of anyone he perceived as beneath his social status. Elena managed complex investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, held advanced degrees in economics and computer science, and spoke 4 languages fluently. But even if she had been exactly what she appeared to be, a hardworking young woman trying to make ends meet in an expensive city, Marcus's cruelty would have been equally inexcusable. As the lunch rush began, Elena found herself moving through her tasks with mechanical precision while her mind processed the implications of the morning's events. The irony was almost perfect. The man who desperately needed her investment had just revealed exactly why he didn't deserve it. No amount of technological innovation could justify supporting a leader who treated people as expendable objects.
But the situation was more complex than a simple personal offense. Elena had a fiduciary responsibility to her investors, and next-gen analytics technology truly was revolutionary. Chen's personality flaws didn't diminish the potential market value of his artificial intelligence algorithms. Separating personal feelings from professional judgment was supposed to be her strength. Throughout the afternoon, Elena served other customers with her usual professional warmth, while internally debating the ethics of personal character versus business potential. A pharmaceutical CEO known for aggressive cost-cutting measures that had resulted in layoffs of thousands still deserved investment if his company could develop life-saving medications. A tech entrepreneur with a reputation for workplace harassment had still created platforms that connected millions of people worldwide. Where was the line between personal conduct and professional merit? How much weight should character carry when measured against potential societal benefit? The questions followed Elena home to her Queen Anne apartment as evening descended over Seattle. She sat in her office, surrounded by financial projections and market analyses, staring at the next-gen analytics file that represented months of research and due diligence. Every metric screamed that this was the investment opportunity of the year. Every instinct warned her that Chen was exactly the kind of leader whose character flaws would eventually destroy whatever he built. Elena opened her laptop and began composing 2 different documents. The first was a formal investment proposal, outlining the terms under which Meridian Capital would provide the $40 million that could save next-gen analytics. The second was a detailed analysis of why Marcus Chen represented an unacceptable risk as a business partner, regardless of his company's potential. As she worked through the night, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been celebrated as one of the most promising young investors in the country. Then David's betrayal and the subsequent scandal had taught her that reputation could be destroyed overnight, but character was built through thousands of small choices made when no one was watching. The Marcus Chen she had observed today was someone who made cruel choices when he thought the consequences wouldn't matter. The question was whether she could separate that knowledge from her professional judgment, or whether character and competence were ultimately inseparable. Outside her window, Seattle's skyline glittered with the lights of ambition and achievement. Somewhere in that constellation of success and failure, Marcus Chen was probably working late into the night, desperately seeking the investment that could save his company. He had no idea that the solution to his problems had been standing right in front of him, holding a cloth and trying to clean up his mess. The irony would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. And speaking of stakes, we're about to reveal the shocking truth that will change everything for Marcus Chen. But first, if you're invested in this story and want to see how it ends, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next, and your support means the world to us. Marcus Chen's week spiraled downward with the relentless momentum of an avalanche. The canceled lunch with Sarah Mitchell was just the beginning. By Wednesday morning, 2 more potential clients had postponed meetings indefinitely, citing budget restructuring and strategic reassessment. His assistant Jenny began each day with increasingly grim updates, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced with the strained professionalism of someone trying to manage an impossible situation. "Sir, Venture Dynamics called again," Jenny reported during their morning briefing, her voice carrying the careful neutrality she had perfected for delivering bad news. "They're concerned about the rumors regarding regulatory scrutiny of mid-market tech investments. They want to postpone the presentation until next month." Marcus stared out at Elliott Bay from his office window, watching ferries crawl across steel-gray water like slow-moving beasts carrying cargo between worlds. Each vessel represented the kind of steady, predictable progress that now seemed impossibly distant from his own chaotic circumstances. "What rumors?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would only deepen his growing paranoia. "Something about increased federal oversight of AI companies, particularly those dealing with consumer data analytics," Jenny replied, consulting her notes with the same precision she brought to all aspects of her job. She had been with Marcus for 2 years, through the successful launch of NextGen and the early days when venture capitalists competed for the privilege of funding their revolutionary technology. Watching that success crumble had been almost as painful for her as it was for him. The rumors were poison in the water supply of Seattle's tight-knit tech investment community. In a world where perception drove decision-making, the mere suggestion of regulatory problems could kill deals faster than actual evidence of wrongdoing. Marcus had built his career on the principle that confidence was currency, but confidence became worthless when the market itself lost faith in your sector. His lunch that day was at Coastal, a waterfront restaurant known for its discretion and private dining rooms where sensitive business discussions could unfold without interruption. The meeting was with James Peterson, a former colleague from Marcus's days at Microsoft, who had launched his own investment fund focused on emerging technologies. If anyone understood the revolutionary potential of NextGen's AI algorithms, it would be James. But James Peterson was 20 minutes late, and Marcus found himself once again sitting alone at a carefully chosen table, watching other people's success unfold in quiet conversations around him. The irony of waiting for salvation in restaurants was not lost on him, but high-stakes business still required the ritual of shared meals and carefully neutral environments. When James finally arrived, his expression carried the uncomfortable neutrality of someone preparing to deliver disappointing news. They had known each other for 8 years, had collaborated on projects that generated hundreds of millions in revenue, had celebrated each other's achievements at industry conferences and private gatherings. But business relationships, Marcus was learning, could evaporate as quickly as the technology cycles that drove them. "Marcus, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to pass on next gen," James said, after minimal pleasantries, his directness a mercy that eliminated the torture of drawn-out hope. "The board is concerned about regulatory uncertainty in the AI space, and frankly, there are some concerns about market timing that we can't ignore." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing with the weight of months of preparation and expectation. Marcus had pitched this meeting as his company's salvation, had spent weeks preparing financial projections and market analyses that proved NextGen's value proposition. But venture capital wasn't about objective metrics. It was about confidence and timing and the indefinable alchemy that transformed good ideas into fundable opportunities. "James, you know this technology better than anyone," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a desperation he couldn't quite suppress. "The beta results exceed every projection. We're not just predicting consumer behavior, we're revolutionizing how companies understand their customers. This isn't market timing, this is market transformation." James Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his body language betraying the discomfort that came with disappointing a former colleague. "I believe in the technology, Marcus, but investing isn't just about innovation, it's about leadership and execution. There have been some concerns raised about management style and team retention. Good technology needs stable leadership to reach its potential." The comment about management style felt like a knife between the ribs, precise and devastating. Marcus prided himself on being a demanding leader who inspired excellence through high standards and clear expectations. The suggestion that his leadership style was somehow problematic felt like a fundamental attack on his professional identity. "What concerns?" Marcus pressed, though part of him dreaded the answer. He'd heard whispers about former employees making complaints, but he had dismissed them as the inevitable grumbling that accompanied any high-pressure environment. Successful companies weren't built by leaders who worried about hurting feelings. James hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Look, I don't want to get into specifics, but there are patterns that investors notice. High turnover, complaints about workplace culture, situations where talented people leave good opportunities because of management issues. Fair or not, those things matter when we're making long-term investment decisions." The rest of the lunch passed in a haze of professional courtesy, masking personal devastation. James tried to soften the rejection by suggesting alternative funding sources and offering to make introductions to other potential investors, but Marcus barely heard the consolatory offerings. His mind was spiraling through the mathematics of impending failure. 6 weeks of operating capital remaining, payroll obligations that would consume most of that, and a technology breakthrough that might die stillborn because its creator couldn't secure the funding to bring it to market. As he walked back to his office through Pioneer Square, Marcus found himself retracing the route that had led him past Meridian Bistro earlier that week. The restaurant's windows glowed warmly in the afternoon light, its interior populated by the same cast of business professionals conducting the same kinds of meetings he had just concluded so disastrously. For a moment, he considered stopping in, not for food, but for the strange comfort of being in a place where his recent failure felt less immediate. But the memory of his encounter with the waitress made him quicken his pace instead. The last thing he needed was another reminder of his deteriorating emotional control, another situation where stress and frustration might lead to the kind of behavior that was apparently now part of his reputation in Seattle's business community. The afternoon brought a series of increasingly urgent calls from his management team. Sarah Kim, NextGen's chief technology officer and one of the most brilliant engineers Marcus had ever worked with, requested an emergency meeting to discuss the company's future. Michael Torres, the head of sales, wanted to know how to respond to client inquiries about long-term stability. Jennifer Walsh from Human Resources needed guidance on how to handle the growing anxiety among staff members who had heard rumors about potential layoffs. Each conversation was a small exercise in leadership theater, requiring Marcus to project confidence he didn't feel while making promises he wasn't certain he could keep. The irony wasn't lost on him that his reputation for demanding excellence from others was now being tested by his ability to perform under the intensest pressure of his career. That evening, alone in his Belltown penthouse apartment, Marcus found himself reviewing the past 5 years of his professional life with the kind of harsh scrutiny he usually reserved for failed products or underperforming employees. The 2 companies he had successfully sold, the industry recognition, the speaking engagements and media coverage, all of it felt suddenly insubstantial when measured against his current inability to secure funding for what might be his most important work. He poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, a bottle he had been saving for the celebration of NextGen's Series B funding round, and stood on his balcony overlooking Elliott Bay. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered stars, each one representing someone else's success story, someone else's dreams made manifest in steel and glass, and the endless pursuit of the next breakthrough. The whiskey burned as he contemplated the very real possibility that NextGen Analytics might not survive the month. Somewhere in Seattle's network of investors and venture capitalists was the funding he needed to save his company, but finding it required navigating a landscape suddenly hostile to his presence. Every door that closed narrowed his options. Every postponed meeting brought him closer to the moment when he would have to tell his team that their collective work might die for lack of financial support. As the evening deepened into night, Marcus realized that his problems weren't just financial or strategic. They were personal, rooted in patterns of behavior that had apparently been noticed and cataloged by the very people whose support he now desperately needed. The waitress at Meridian Bistro had been just one moment in a larger pattern of interactions that, when viewed collectively, painted a picture of someone whose success had perhaps made him forget the human cost of his ambition. The city below continued its nightly rhythm, indifferent to his crisis. But Marcus Chen was beginning to understand that his company's survival might depend not just on finding new investors, but on confronting the possibility that the person he had become might be standing in the way of the success he desperately sought. Friday morning arrived with the kind of Pacific Northwest drizzle that made the entire city feel wrapped in gray gauze. Marcus's office, usually a sanctuary of purposeful energy, felt more like a war room where increasingly desperate strategies were planned and discarded with equal speed. The walls, decorated with awards and photographs chronicling his rise through Seattle's tech hierarchy, now felt like monuments to a success that might be slipping away despite his best efforts. Jenny knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a departure from protocol that immediately signaled emergency status. "Sir, we have a situation," she said, her professional composure barely masking obvious distress. 3 more employees submitted their resignations this morning. Sarah Kim wants to see you immediately, and there's a reporter from TechCrunch on line 2 asking about rumors regarding company stability. The defections felt like physical wounds. Each departing employee represented not just lost talent, but confirmation that NextGen's internal problems were becoming external realities. In Seattle's interconnected tech community, employee departures were tracked as carefully as stock prices, and patterns of turnover could kill funding prospects more effectively than poor financial performance. Which employees, Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. The most talented engineers always had multiple options. They would be the first to abandon what they perceived as a sinking ship. David Liu from the machine learning team, Patricia Morrison from data analytics, and Jenny hesitated, consulting her notes with obvious reluctance. And Amanda Chen from user experience. She specifically requested that I tell you her departure has nothing to do with the company's financial situation. Amanda Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, had been one of NextGen's first hires. Someone Marcus had personally recruited from Google with promises about changing the world through revolutionary technology. Her resignation note, delivered through Jenny rather than directly, felt like a public rebuke of his leadership at the moment when he could least afford additional damage to his reputation. The reporter from TechCrunch proved to be Jessica Martinez, someone Marcus had worked with during better times when NextGen was a rising success story worthy of positive coverage. Now her questions carried the careful neutrality of someone investigating a potential failure. Each inquiry designed to confirm or deny the rumors circulating through Seattle's business community. Marcus, I'm hearing concerns about employee retention and management culture at NextGen. Can you comment on the recent departures and what they might indicate about the company's internal dynamics? The conversation was a minefield where every answer could be interpreted as confirmation of problems or evidence of deflection. Marcus found himself caught between honesty and necessary self-protection, trying to address legitimate concerns while avoiding statements that could accelerate his company's decline. The irony that his reputation for straight talk was now making it impossible to communicate effectively was not lost on him. NextGen is experiencing the normal challenges that come with rapid growth and market evolution, he replied, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. We're focused on building revolutionary technology, and that requires maintaining high standards for both innovation and team performance. Jenny's follow-up questions grew increasingly pointed, each one probing for the human story behind the business facade. She had clearly been talking to former employees, gathering quotes and anecdotes that painted a picture of a CEO whose vision was undermined by his treatment of the people trying to realize it. The conversation ended with promises of fair coverage and opportunities for additional comment. But Marcus recognized the tone of someone who had already decided the story's narrative arc.
By noon, the cascade of bad news had reached critical mass. 2 more potential client meetings had been canceled. The remaining venture capital firms on Marcus's target list had gone radio silent, and internal morale had reached the point where even routine tasks were being completed with the mechanical efficiency of people preparing for unemployment. Marcus found himself once again walking through Pioneer Square, this time without any specific destination or purpose. The area's brick buildings and cobblestone streets represented Seattle's history of boom and bust cycles, the endless rhythm of dreams pursued and achieved or abandoned. He was becoming part of that history, another story of ambition that might be remembered only as a cautionary tale about the difference between vision and execution. The rain intensified as he walked, turning the afternoon into a gray meditation on failure and resilience. Other pedestrians hurried past with the focused urgency of people who had places to go and purposes to fulfill, their lives uninterrupted by the kind of existential crisis that was consuming his attention. The contrast between their routine normalcy and his extraordinary circumstances felt like a reminder of how quickly exceptional success could transform into equally exceptional failure. As he approached the corner where Meridian Bistro occupied its historic building, Marcus slowed his pace despite his intention to avoid the restaurant entirely.
Through the rain-streaked windows, he could see the familiar scene of business lunches and professional conversations, the same cast of characters pursuing the same kinds of deals he had once navigated with confidence and skill. There, moving between tables with the same efficient grace he remembered from their previous encounter, was the waitress whose name tag had read Elena. She was serving a table of executives he recognized from various industry events, her demeanor professional and attentive in the way that made good service appear effortless. For a moment, watching her work, Marcus felt a flicker of the shame that had accompanied his behavior earlier that week. The woman was clearly competent at her job, handling multiple tables and complex orders with the kind of multitasking ability that would serve well in any professional environment. His dismissive comment about remembering who ordered the salmon now seemed not just cruel, but fundamentally wrong about the skills required to succeed in any customer-facing role. The recognition that his stress had led him to attack someone who was simply trying to help felt like another weight added to an already unbearable load. Marcus turned away from the restaurant and continued walking, but the image stayed with him. A young woman doing her job with competence and grace, treating customers with respect even when that respect wasn't reciprocated. The contrast between her professional behavior and his own recent performance as a leader was uncomfortable to contemplate, but increasingly difficult to ignore. The rest of Friday passed in a blur of damage control and contingency planning. Marcus spent the afternoon in meetings with his core team, trying to balance honesty about their situation with the kind of leadership that could maintain morale and productivity despite uncertainty about the future. Each conversation required him to perform optimism he didn't feel while making decisions based on scenarios he desperately hoped to avoid. Sarah Kim, his chief technology officer, proved to be as direct as always during their one-on-one meeting. "Marcus, I need to know if we're going to survive the next 2 months," she said, her brilliant mind cutting through emotional complexity to reach practical essentials. "I have 3 job offers, and I need to make a decision that's fair to both of us." The question hung between them like a challenge and an opportunity. Sarah represented the technical heart of next-gen analytics. Losing her would effectively end any possibility of completing their current development cycle or attracting new investment. But keeping her required the kind of honest leadership that Marcus wasn't certain he was capable of providing. "I'm not going to lie to you," he replied, the words feeling both liberating and terrifying. "We're in serious trouble, but I believe we can find the funding to turn this around, and I need your help to make that happen. The technology we're building is too important to let die because of short-term financial challenges." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression revealing the complex calculation that brilliant people make when deciding whether to trust someone else's vision of the future. "I'll stay through the end of the month," she finally said. "But Marcus, you need to understand something. The technical problems we're solving are extraordinary, but they're not our biggest challenge anymore. The biggest challenge is leadership, and that's something only you can fix." Her words carried the weight of someone who had watched talent flee not because of technology failures or market conditions, but because of human failures that could have been prevented. Sarah had been with NextGen since the beginning, had believed in the vision enough to leave a secure position at Amazon, and her potential departure felt like a referendum on everything Marcus had built. The weekend passed in a haze of research and desperation. Marcus spent Saturday calling every contact in his network, reaching out to former colleagues, industry connections, and anyone who might know of available funding sources. Each conversation was a careful dance between honesty and optimism, an attempt to convey both the urgency of his situation and confidence in his ability to overcome it. Sunday brought a different kind of torment. The forced inactivity of a day when most business contacts were unavailable, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that next-gen analytics might not survive another week. He found himself walking through different neighborhoods of Seattle, trying to find perspective by observing other people's lives and routines. In Pike Place Market, he watched vendors who had been selling flowers and crafts in the same spots for decades, their success measured not in quarterly growth or venture capital rounds, but in daily interactions with customers who valued their products and service. The contrast between their steady, sustainable businesses and his high-stakes venture felt like a lesson he wasn't ready to learn. In Capitol Hill, he observed young professionals enjoying weekend brunches and coffee shop conversations, their faces bright with the kind of optimism that comes from believing that hard work and good intentions will be rewarded with success. Marcus remembered feeling that certainty, back when his career trajectory seemed limitless and his biggest concern was choosing between competing opportunities. Now, facing the potential collapse of everything he had built, Marcus found himself questioning assumptions that had guided his entire professional life. The idea that exceptional performance justified exceptional behavior, that results mattered more than methods, that leadership meant making hard decisions regardless of their human cost. All of these beliefs were being tested by the very real possibility that his approach to success might be the cause of his current failure. Monday morning arrived with the finality of an execution date. Marcus sat in his office before dawn, watching Seattle emerge from darkness into the gray half-light that passed for sunrise in October. The city below was stirring to life with the routine energy of people pursuing their goals and dreams, unaware that 43 floors above them, one man's dreams were dying from lack of financial oxygen. Jenny arrived at 7:30 with coffee and the kind of grim efficiency that had become their new normal. "Sir, I have the week's schedule," she said, though they both knew the schedule had been decimated by cancellations and postponements. "There's also a message from someone requesting a meeting. She wouldn't give details but said it was regarding investment opportunities for NextGen." The call had come on Sunday evening after business hours from someone identifying herself only as E. Vasquez from Meridian Capital. The name meant nothing to Marcus. Seattle's venture capital community was small enough that he knew most of the major players, and Meridian Capital wasn't familiar. But mysterious investors sometimes emerged from unexpected places, particularly when established firms had already passed on opportunities. "When does she want to meet?" Marcus asked, already calculating how to fit another pitch into a schedule that had more empty spaces than appointments. "Today at 2 p.m. She suggested Meridian Bistro, said she had a standing reservation there." She paused, consulting her notes. "I thought that was an interesting coincidence given the name similarity." The location made Marcus uncomfortable for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. Returning to the scene of his worst behavior of the past month felt like tempting fate, but desperate circumstances required accepting meetings wherever investors preferred to conduct them. Besides, one embarrassing encounter with a waitress seemed trivial compared to the potential collapse of his company. Marcus spent the morning preparing for what might be his last chance to save next-gen analytics. He reviewed every aspect of their technology, refined his pitch to focus on market potential rather than current challenges, and practiced the kind of confident presentation that had once made him a sought-after speaker at industry conferences. But beneath the surface preparation, anxiety gnawed at his confidence like acid. Each previous rejection had made the next pitch more difficult. Each canceled meeting had increased the pressure on remaining opportunities. The mathematics were simple. He was running out of time, money, and options in roughly equal measure. At 1:45, Marcus walked through Pioneer Square toward what might be his company's salvation or final disappointment. The October afternoon was crisp and clear,
One of those rare Seattle days when the city emerged from its customary cloud cover to reveal the stunning natural beauty that drew people from around the world to the Pacific Northwest. Mount Rainier stood in sharp relief against a brilliant blue sky, its snow-covered peak seeming close enough to touch. The beauty of the day felt like mockery to someone facing professional extinction, but Marcus tried to interpret it as a positive omen. Perhaps this meeting would be different. Perhaps Vasquez from Meridian Capital would see past the rumors and recent setbacks to recognize the revolutionary potential of next-gen's technology.
Meridian Bistro looked exactly as he remembered. Elegant but understated, populated by the kind of successful professionals who conducted serious business over carefully prepared meals. The maitre d' recognized him immediately, leading him to a corner table that offered privacy for sensitive conversations. "Ms. Vasquez will be with you shortly," the host said, arranging menus and water glasses with practiced precision. "She asked me to let you know that she's looking forward to the discussion." Marcus settled into his chair and reviewed his materials one final time. The presentation folder contained financial projections, market analyses, technology demonstrations, and client testimonials, everything needed to make a compelling case for investment. But he had learned that venture capital decisions were often made on intangible factors: chemistry between investor and entrepreneur, confidence in leadership ability, gut instincts about market timing and execution capability. At precisely 2 o'clock, Marcus looked up to see a woman approaching his table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. She was perhaps 30, impeccably dressed in a charcoal business suit that suggested both professionalism and substantial personal success. Her auburn hair was styled in a way that framed intelligent eyes, and she moved with the kind of purposeful grace that indicated extensive experience in high-stakes business environments. It took him several seconds to realize that Vasquez from Meridian Capital was Elena, the waitress he had insulted 6 days earlier. The recognition hit Marcus like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs and leaving him momentarily paralyzed in his chair. Elena Vasquez, not Elena the waitress, but Elena Vasquez, managing partner of Meridian Capital, approached his table with the same measured grace he remembered, but now her bearing carried an entirely different significance. The black server's uniform had been replaced by a perfectly tailored Armani suit, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo that spoke of professional success, and her entire presence radiated the unmistakable authority of someone who controlled significant financial resources. "Mr. Chen," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand as she reached his table. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. I'm Elena Vasquez from Meridian Capital." Marcus stood automatically, his mind racing to process the impossible transformation before him. The woman who had been cleaning up his spilled water a week earlier was now introducing herself as a potential investor in his company. The cognitive dissonance was so complete that he momentarily wondered if he was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. "Ms. Vasquez," he managed, accepting her handshake while studying her face for any sign of the subservient service worker he remembered. There was none. This version of Elena projected confidence, intelligence, and the kind of quiet power that came from controlling other people's financial destinies. "I have to admit, I'm surprised by... I think we may have met before." Elena's smile was perfectly professional, revealing nothing of her thoughts or emotions. "Have we? I don't recall, but I meet so many people in my line of work. Perhaps you're thinking of someone else." Her tone was pleasantly neutral, giving him no clue whether she was genuinely confused or simply choosing not to acknowledge their previous encounter. As they settled into their seats,
Marcus found himself studying Elena with the intense scrutiny of someone trying to solve a puzzle that defied logical explanation. Everything about her presentation screamed success and authority. The expensive watch, the confident posture, the way other diners seemed to recognize and respect her presence in the restaurant. This was clearly someone who belonged in Seattle's financial elite. Yet he distinctly remembered her wearing a server's uniform and cleaning tables. "Mr. Chen, I've been following next-gen analytics for several months," Elena began, opening a leather portfolio that contained what appeared to be extensive research materials. "Your artificial intelligence algorithms represent exactly the kind of revolutionary technology that Meridian Capital seeks to support. I'm particularly impressed with your beta test results and the potential applications across multiple industry verticals." Marcus tried to focus on her words, but his attention kept shifting between her current professional presentation and his memory of their previous interaction. The woman sitting across from him was clearly educated, articulate, and deeply knowledgeable about his company's technology. The cognitive dissonance between this Elena and the one he had dismissed as intellectually inferior was creating a kind of mental vertigo that made concentration difficult. "I appreciate your interest in NextGen," Marcus replied, his voice carrying less confidence than usual. "Though I have to say, your research seems remarkably thorough for someone I haven't met before." Elena's eyes met his directly, and for just a moment, he caught a flicker of something that might have been amusement or satisfaction. "Due diligence is essential in our business, Mr. Chen. I make it a point to understand not just the technology and market potential, but the leadership and company culture as well. Character matters as much as capability when making long-term investment decisions."
The emphasis on character felt pointed, though Elena's expression remained perfectly neutral. Marcus found himself wondering exactly what kind of research she had conducted, and whether their previous encounter had somehow been part of an elaborate evaluation process. The possibility that his worst moment had been witnessed by a potential investor was both humiliating and terrifying. "Before we discuss specific investment terms," Elena continued, "I'd like to understand your philosophy regarding leadership and team management. Building revolutionary technology requires not just brilliant engineering, but also the ability to attract and retain top talent. How do you approach those challenges?" The question felt like a test, though Marcus couldn't determine what answer she was seeking. In normal circumstances, he would have launched into his standard discussion of high-performance expectations and the demanding standards necessary for breakthrough innovation. But something in Elena's tone suggested that his usual approach might not be well received. "I believe in setting high standards and pushing teams to exceed their perceived limitations," Marcus said carefully. "Revolutionary breakthroughs don't come from comfortable environments. They require leaders who are willing to make difficult decisions and demand excellence from everyone involved." Elena nodded thoughtfully, making notes in her portfolio. "And how do you handle situations where those high standards create friction with team members? I imagine there can be tensions between pushing for excellence and maintaining positive workplace relationships." Marcus felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the restaurant's comfortable temperature. The question seemed designed to probe exactly the areas where his leadership style had apparently created problems. "There are always challenges when you're trying to build something unprecedented," he replied. "Not everyone is suited for the kind of environment where extraordinary results are expected." "Interesting perspective," Elena said, her tone remaining professionally neutral. "I found that the most successful companies are often those where demanding standards are paired with genuine respect for team members' contributions. The combination of high expectations and human dignity tends to produce better long-term results than approaches that prioritize outcomes over relationships." The comment about human dignity felt like a direct reference to their previous interaction, though Elena's expression gave no indication that she was speaking from personal experience.
Marcus found himself caught between the desire to address their past interaction directly and the fear that acknowledging it might damage his chances of securing the investment he desperately needed. "Miss Vasquez, I have to ask, are you certain we haven't met before? There's something familiar about—" Marcus trailed off, unsure how to complete the question without potentially insulting a woman who might hold his company's future in her hands. Elena's pause was almost imperceptible, but Marcus caught it. "I'm quite certain, Mr. Chen, though as I mentioned, I do encounter many people through my work. Perhaps you're thinking of a conference or industry event." Her smile was perfectly professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly what he was thinking. The lunch proceeded with Elena asking increasingly detailed questions about next-gen's technology, market strategy, and competitive positioning. Her knowledge was impressive, demonstrating the kind of deep understanding that came from extensive research and genuine expertise in the field. But underneath the professional discussion, Marcus sensed an undercurrent of evaluation that went beyond typical due diligence. Every question seemed designed to probe not just his company's capabilities, but his own character and leadership approach. When Elena asked about employee retention rates, Marcus found himself deflecting rather than providing specific numbers. When she inquired about management philosophy, he gave carefully sanitized responses that avoided mentioning the recent departures or workplace culture concerns. The investment we're discussing would be $40 million over 18 months. That's substantial capital requiring careful consideration of risk factors and potential returns. Beyond the technology and market opportunity, I need confidence that the leadership team can execute effectively under pressure. Marcus nodded, though the word pressure felt like another pointed reference to their previous encounter. "I've successfully built and sold 2 companies, Miss Vasquez. My track record speaks to my ability to execute under challenging circumstances." "Track records are certainly important," Elena agreed, "but I'm also interested in how leaders handle unexpected challenges and high-stress situations. The ability to maintain composure and treat people with respect during difficult moments often determines long-term success more than past achievements." The reference to treating people with respect was unmistakable now. Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack under the weight of recognition and growing anxiety. The woman sitting across from him had witnessed his worst moment, had been the target of his stress-induced cruelty, and was now in a position to determine his company's fate. "Miss Vasquez, I have to ask, are you certain we haven't met before? There's something familiar about—" Elena's pause was almost imperceptible, but Marcus caught it. "I'm quite certain, Mr. Chen, though as I mentioned, I do encounter many people through my work. Perhaps you're thinking of a conference or industry event." Her smile was perfectly professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly what he was thinking. "An apology for what, Mr. Chen? I'm afraid I don't follow your meaning."
The denial was professional, but unconvincing. Marcus realized that Elena was giving him an opportunity to confess without forcing the admission, allowing him to demonstrate the kind of character she was apparently evaluating. The moment felt like a crossroads where his response would determine not just the potential investment, but his own integrity. "Last week, in this restaurant, I was having a terrible day and took my frustration out on someone who was trying to help me," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine regret. "I made assumptions about someone's intelligence and worth based on their job, and I spoke with cruelty that was completely unjustified. If that person was you, then I owe you not just an apology but recognition that my behavior was inexcusable, regardless of whatever stress I was experiencing." Elena set down her wine glass and studied him for a long moment. The professional mask finally slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been surprise or possibly respect. "That's an interesting confession, Mr. Chen. What makes you think this hypothetical incident involved me?" Because the woman I spoke to responded with grace and wisdom that stayed with me all week, Marcus replied, feeling a strange relief at finally addressing the truth directly. She handled my rudeness with more class than I showed, and she said something about everyone fighting battles we can't see. It was exactly the kind of insight that someone who understands human nature would offer. Elena leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting into something that was no longer purely professional. For the first time since she had arrived, Marcus glimpsed the person he had encountered a week earlier, not the powerful investor, but the individual who had tried to offer comfort to a stranger in distress. "Mr. Chen," Elena said quietly. "I am Elena Vasquez, managing partner of Meridian Capital. I am also Elena, the server, who tried to clean up your mess last week. Both of those identities are equally real, and both of them inform how I evaluate potential investments." The confirmation hit Marcus like a wave of recognition and shame. Everything about the past week suddenly made sense. The careful questions, the emphasis on character, the way she had studied his responses for signs of the behavior she had witnessed firsthand. He had been pitching to someone who had seen him at his worst, someone who had personal experience with exactly the leadership qualities that were apparently damaging his reputation. "Why?" Marcus asked simply. "Why work as a server when you clearly don't need to?" Elena's smile carried a complexity that suggested stories he couldn't imagine. "Because understanding how leaders treat people when they think it doesn't matter tells you everything about how they'll behave when it does. I've learned more about character in 3 years of serving food than I did in a decade of boardroom meetings." Marcus felt the weight of recognition settling over him like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about one moment of rudeness. It was about patterns of behavior that had been observed, cataloged, and found wanting. The realization that his treatment of service workers had been a form of unconscious audition for one of the most important relationships in his professional life was both ironic and devastating. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I assume this means Meridian Capital won't be investing in NextGen?" Elena's expression was unreadable as she considered his question. The power dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the potential savior of his company, but the judge whose verdict would determine whether his dreams lived or died. The woman he had dismissed as intellectually inferior now held his professional future in her hands. "That," Elena said quietly, "depends entirely on what you've learned from our conversation today." Marcus sat in stunned silence for heartbeats, processing the magnitude of his situation. The woman across from him wasn't just any investor. She was someone who had witnessed his character at its absolute worst, someone who now held the power to either save or destroy his company based on that single moment of cruelty. The irony was so complete, it felt almost cosmic. His salvation lay in the hands of the person he had most deeply wronged. "Miss Vasquez." "Elena," Marcus began, his voice carrying a vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. "I don't know where to begin apologizing for my behavior. What I said to you was inexcusable, and it revealed something about my character that I'm deeply ashamed of. But I need you to know that it wasn't representative of who I want to be or who I'm capable of being." Elena listened without interruption, her expression carefully neutral, but her attention complete. She could see her evaluating not just my words, but the sincerity behind them, the body language that might reveal whether his contrition was genuine or merely strategic. "The truth is,
I've been so focused on achieving success that I lost sight of how my behavior affected other people. I told myself that demanding excellence justified harsh treatment, that results mattered more than relationships. I was wrong, and it's cost me more than just this potential investment. It's cost me the respect of my team and my own self-respect. Elena picked up her wine glass, swirling the liquid thoughtfully before responding. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your acknowledgement of what happened, but I need you to understand something. My decision about investing in NextGen isn't just about personal feelings. It's about whether I believe you can be the kind of leader who builds sustainable success, not just short-term results.
Marcus nodded, recognizing the distinction she was drawing. This wasn't about forgiveness or personal redemption. It was about professional competence and the ability to create value for investors. Elena Vasquez might accept his apology as a person, but Elena Vasquez, the venture capitalist, needed evidence that he could change his behavior in ways that would benefit her investment. What would that evidence look like? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer might be more demanding than he was prepared to accept. Elena opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick document that Marcus recognized as a comprehensive analysis of NextGen analytics. The depth of research was staggering. Financial projections, competitive analyses, technology assessments, and what appeared to be extensive interviews with current and former employees. I've been evaluating your company for 6 months, Elena said, flipping through pages covered with charts, graphs, and detailed notes. The technology is exceptional, the market opportunity is enormous, and the potential returns are significant. Under normal circumstances, this would be exactly the kind of investment Meridian Capital would pursue aggressively. Marcus felt a flicker of hope, though Elena's tone suggested complications were coming. However, Elena continued, my research has uncovered patterns of behavior that represent significant risk factors. High employee turnover, complaints about management style, talented individuals leaving for competitors despite being offered retention packages. These aren't just HR problems, they're fundamental business risks that could undermine even the most revolutionary technology. She pulled out a separate folder containing what appeared to be exit interview summaries and employee feedback reports. Marcus recognized some of the names, brilliant engineers and analysts who had left NextGen over the past year, each departure representing a loss of institutional knowledge and team cohesion. Sarah Kim stayed specifically to see if you would change your leadership approach, Elena said, reading from one of the reports. Amanda Chen left because she felt that no amount of professional success was worth working in an environment where people weren't treated with basic respect. David Liu described the workplace culture as brilliant technology hampered by toxic leadership. Each quote hit Marcus like a physical blow. These weren't anonymous complaints from disgruntled employees. They were specific, detailed criticisms from people he had respected and worked closely with. The pattern Elena was describing represented a fundamental failure of leadership that he had been blind to until now. The question, Elena continued, closing the folder and meeting his eyes directly, is whether these patterns can be changed or whether they represent fundamental character flaws that will eventually destroy whatever value the company creates. Marcus felt the full weight of his professional mortality settling over him. This wasn't just about securing funding. It was about confronting the possibility that his approach to leadership was fundamentally flawed, that his success had come at a human cost that was no longer sustainable. Elena, I won't lie to you, Marcus said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone finally admitting difficult truths. I've spent years believing that being demanding and maintaining high standards required a certain toughness that sometimes meant hurting people's feelings. I told myself that great leaders made hard decisions regardless of personal cost, that success required sacrificing comfort for excellence. Elena nodded, encouraging him to continue. But this past week has shown me that my approach wasn't creating excellence. It was creating fear and resentment. The people leaving weren't failures. They were talented professionals who deserved better leadership than I was providing. And my treatment of you last week, that wasn't strength or leadership. That was weakness and insecurity expressed through cruelty towards someone who was trying to help me. Elena leaned forward slightly, her businesslike demeanor softening just enough to reveal genuine interest in his response. Change is possible, Mr. Chen, but it requires more than recognition of problems. It requires concrete actions and accountability measures that ensure new behaviors replace old patterns. Marcus realized that Elena wasn't just evaluating his apology, she was conducting a final interview for the most important position of his career. The job wasn't CEO of Next Gen Analytics, it was the role of someone worthy of her investment and trust. "What would you need to see?" Marcus asked. Elena pulled out a final document from her portfolio, one that appeared to be freshly printed and carefully detailed. If Meridian Capital were to invest in NextGen, it would come with specific conditions designed to address the leadership and culture issues I've identified. These aren't suggestions, they're requirements that would be legally binding as part of our investment agreement. Marcus accepted the document and began reading, his heart sinking as he processed the scope of changes Elena was demanding. Executive coaching with a leadership consultant who specializes in organizational culture, monthly 360-degree feedback reviews from all team members, implementation of anonymous reporting systems for workplace concerns, mandatory participation in diversity and inclusion training, regular culture assessments conducted by independent third parties. But the most challenging requirement came near the end. CEO will personally reach out to all former employees who left due to management concerns, offering direct apologies and requesting feedback on leadership improvement. These conversations will be documented and reviewed as part of ongoing culture assessment. Marcus looked up to find Elena watching him carefully, obviously reading his reaction to terms that were far more invasive and demanding than any investment agreement he had previously encountered. "These conditions are extensive," Marcus said, trying to process the implications of accepting such oversight. "They're necessary," Elena replied firmly. "Mr. Chen, you're asking me to invest $40 million in a company led by someone whose management style has driven away significant talent. If you want my capital, you need to prove that you're willing to do the difficult work of becoming the kind of leader who can protect that investment." Marcus continued reading, discovering additional requirements that felt increasingly personal. Commitment to working with an executive coach for a minimum of 2 years, participation in leadership development programs, implementation of employee retention bonuses tied to culture survey results, and personal accountability measures that would affect his own compensation based on team satisfaction metrics. "And if I don't accept these conditions?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Then Meridian Capital passes on the investment," Elena said simply. "Mr. Chen, I believe in your technology, and I believe in the market opportunity, but I don't invest in leaders who treat people as expendable resources. Change these patterns, prove that you can build a culture that supports exceptional performance through respect rather than fear, and you'll have the $40 million you need to build something revolutionary." Marcus felt the full weight of the choice before him. Accepting Elena's conditions meant acknowledging that his leadership style had been fundamentally flawed, submitting to oversight that would be both humbling and challenging, and committing to personal changes that would affect every aspect of how he approached his role as CEO. But the alternative was watching Next Gen Analytics die for lack of funding, seeing his team's brilliant work never reach the market, and accepting that his inability to change had cost him the opportunity to build something that could genuinely impact the world. "I need time to consider this," Marcus said, though he already knew what his answer would have to be.
Elena nodded, her expression showing understanding for the difficulty of his position. Take the time you need, but understand that this offer expires at the end of the week. After that, Meridian Capital will pursue other opportunities and you'll need to find funding elsewhere. As lunch concluded and Elena prepared to leave, she reached into her portfolio one final time and pulled out a small card. "Mr. Chen, there's one more thing I want you to have." Marcus accepted the card and immediately recognized it as the receipt from his meal the previous week, the lunch where he had encountered her as a server. But written on the back in elegant handwriting was a message. "Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, Elena." Looking up at her, Marcus realized that Elena had known exactly who he was during their first encounter. She had been evaluating him from the moment he sat down at that table, watching to see how he would treat someone he perceived as being beneath his status. His test had begun long before he realized he was being tested, and he had failed spectacularly. "You knew," Marcus said quietly. Elena's smile was sad but not unkind. "I always know who I'm serving, Mr. Chen. The question is whether they know who they're revealing themselves to be." As she walked away, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of her ultimatum, he understood that his choice wasn't really between accepting or rejecting investment conditions. It was between becoming the kind of person worthy of the trust she was offering to extend, or remaining the kind of person whose success was built on the diminishment of others. The receipt in his hands felt like both an indictment and an opportunity for redemption. The question was whether he had the courage to change not just his behavior, but the fundamental beliefs about leadership and success that had shaped his entire career. Outside the restaurant windows, Seattle continued its daily rhythm of ambition and achievement, unaware that one man's reckoning with his own character was unfolding over the remnants of what might be either his last meal as a failed CEO or his first as someone committed to becoming worthy of the success he sought. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Next-Gen Analytics' new headquarters, casting long shadows across an open workspace that buzzed with the kind of purposeful energy that Marcus had forgotten was possible. The move from their cramped Pioneer Square office to this bright, collaborative space in South Lake Union had been one of the first visible changes following Meridian Capital's investment, but the deeper transformations were still unfolding in ways both subtle and profound.
Marcus stood at his desk, no longer in a corner office separated from his team, but positioned in the center of the workspace where conversations flowed naturally around him. The symbolism hadn't been lost on anyone. Leadership by proximity, rather than hierarchy, had become one of the many changes that still felt foreign, but increasingly natural. "Morning stand-up in 5 minutes, called Sarah Kim, her voice carrying the kind of relaxed authority that came from working in an environment where brilliance was nurtured rather than demanded through fear. She had not only stayed beyond her end-of-month deadline, but had become instrumental in helping Marcus implement the cultural changes that Elena's investment had required. The daily stand-up meetings were another innovation, borrowed from Elena's suggestion that transparency and regular communication could prevent the kind of small problems that often grew into team-destroying conflicts. Instead of Marcus dictating priorities from behind closed doors, the entire team gathered each morning to share updates, challenges, and collaborative solutions. Marcus walked toward the gathering circle of engineers, analysts, and designers who comprised NextGen's core team. 3 months ago, this group had been depleted by departures and demoralized by uncertainty. Today, they looked like what they had always possessed the potential to become: a collection of brilliant minds working together toward a shared vision. "Sarah, how are the new user interface prototypes testing?" Marcus asked, his tone carrying genuine curiosity rather than the demanding interrogation that had characterized his previous management style. Better than expected, Sarah replied, pulling up holographic displays that showed real-time user engagement metrics. The machine learning algorithms are adapting to user preferences 40% faster than our original projections. Elena's suggestion about prioritizing user empathy in our design process was spot on. The reference to Elena had become natural over the past months. Her investment had brought more than just capital. It had brought insights drawn from her unique perspective on human behavior and organizational dynamics. Marcus had learned to value her counsel, not just as an investor, but as someone whose understanding of people complemented his grasp of technology. Any challenges we need to address? Marcus continued, the question representing a fundamental shift in how he approached team management. Instead of waiting for problems to escalate the crisis levels, he had learned to create safe spaces for early identification and collaborative problem-solving. David Park, one of the junior engineers, raised his hand tentatively. Actually, I'm struggling with the data visualization module. The complexity is beyond what I originally estimated, and I'm worried about missing our sprint deadline. 3 months ago, David's admission would have triggered a lecture about proper estimation techniques and professional accountability. Today, Marcus recognized it as exactly the kind of early warning that could prevent larger problems. Who has experience with complex data visualization that could pair with David this week? Marcus asked the group, immediately seeing several hands go up. Sarah, can you facilitate a knowledge-sharing session this afternoon? Let's treat this as a learning opportunity that strengthens the whole team. The transformation in team dynamics was evident in moments like these. Instead of individual engineers struggling in isolation to avoid the shame of needing help, problems were now treated as collaborative challenges that improved everyone's skills through shared solutions. As the stand-up concluded and team members dispersed to their various projects, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his understanding of leadership had evolved. The executive coaching that Elena had required as part of their investment agreement had initially been humiliating, subjecting himself to feedback and instruction like a junior employee learning basic management skills. But the process had revealed that his previous approach to leadership had been based on insecurity rather than strength, fear rather than confidence. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the executive coach who had become instrumental in his personal transformation. Reminder, 360-degree feedback session at 2 p.m. today. Team reviews have been compiled and are ready for discussion. The monthly feedback sessions had been terrifying at first, requiring Marcus to sit through detailed critiques of his leadership from every person who worked with him. But over time, they had become valuable opportunities for course correction and continuous improvement. The shift from viewing feedback as personal attack to treating it as performance data had been one of the most difficult but important changes in his mindset. Marcus walked to the small conference room that had been designated for sensitive conversations, arriving early to review the feedback summaries before meeting with Dr. Hendricks. The reports showed steady improvement in team satisfaction, communication effectiveness, and workplace culture metrics. But they also revealed areas where his old patterns sometimes resurfaced under pressure. "You're early," observed Dr. Hendricks as she entered the room, carrying the professional warmth that had helped Marcus navigate some of the most difficult conversations of his career. "How are you feeling about this month's results?" Patricia Hendricks was exactly the kind of consultant Marcus would have dismissed 6 months ago. Someone who talked about emotions and relationships rather than metrics and deliverables. But her expertise in organizational psychology had proven invaluable in helping him understand the connection between personal behavior and business outcomes.
The feedback shows remarkable progress, Dr. Hendricks said, reviewing the compiled reports. Your team's satisfaction scores have increased by 60%, and retention rates are at an all-time high. But more importantly, you're building something sustainable. Marcus nodded, still amazed by the transformation. 6 months ago, his company had been dying from toxic leadership. Today, Next-Gen Analytics was thriving, with a $40 million investment and a team that actually wanted to work together. A knock on the conference room door interrupted their session. Elena Vasquez stepped in, no longer disguised as a server, but wearing her signature business attire. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Elena said with a smile that had become genuinely warm over the months of their professional partnership. "I wanted to personally deliver some news." Marcus stood, curious about what had brought one of Seattle's most powerful investors to their offices unannounced. "We just received confirmation," Elena continued, her eyes bright with excitement. "Google wants to acquire next-gen analytics for $200 million. Your AI technology has proven even more revolutionary than we initially projected." The room fell silent as the magnitude of her words sank in. Marcus felt a surge of emotion, not just triumph, but gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this moment. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, "I need you to know something. The day we met at the restaurant, when I was at my absolute worst, that was the moment that saved my career. You didn't just invest in my technology. You invested in my potential to become a better leader." Elena's expression softened. "Marcus, true leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to grow, to acknowledge mistakes, and to put people before profits. You did the hard work of changing. The success follows naturally from that." Dr. Hendricks gathered her materials, smiling at the transformation she had witnessed. "This is what happens when brilliant technology meets authentic leadership. You built something that will change industries because you first changed yourself." As Elena and Dr. Hendricks left, Marcus walked back to his team's workspace. Sarah Kim looked up from her computer, grinning at his expression. "Good news?" she asked. "The best! But more importantly, we built something together that we can all be proud of. Not just the technology, but the way we built it." He looked around at his team, brilliant minds who had chosen to stay, not because they had to, but because they wanted to be part of something meaningful. The young engineer who had once been afraid to admit he needed help was now mentoring new hires. The analysts who had felt unheard were now leading client presentations. Marcus Chen had learned that true success wasn't measured in acquisition prices or Forbes covers. It was measured in the trust of people who chose to follow your vision because they believed in both the destination and the journey. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the people we least expect to teach us. And sometimes our greatest failures become the foundation for our most meaningful successes.